Okay, welcome back. It is late August 1872, and it's time for a kind of quarterly report, a very late summer report. I've been holding off because of some international developments. Now, there's a few areas of business I want to cover, and I think the first thing is going to be kind of international relations. There's been no significant developments with regard to us. Our war with Egypt is over. Our troops have now been withdrawn from Egypt, and we're undergoing a kind of military reorganization. If I could pull up a list of forces, we've kind of renumbered. Why is this so difficult? Yeah, so I've kind of renumbered and reorganized the forces a little bit, and have begun the process of an army expansion. So we've begun the construction or the recruitment and furnishing of a guard corps, which is largely complete, and we're going to do it kind of gradually. A very dramatic expansion in a short period of time. For one, puts pressure on our state revenue, but also puts pressure on foreign relations. And I'm increasingly mindful of that now, given that we are kind of, we've been throwing our weight around a little bit on the international stage. Now, the war between Austria and Russia is over, but Austria continues its kind of international adventurism. It has declared war and occupied Croatia, which you will remember we forced to become independent. We as a part of a peace deal with Austria, we forced them to accept like Croatia to secede, which was really focused around Zagreb. And it was kind of a satellite of ours, really, to all extensive purposes. Satellites aren't really mapped in the game, but it had good economic relations with us and us alone. We had a commerce agreement with them, and we were guaranteeing their independence. We also controlled their only RGO, which was permanently closed because of just continuous strikes and civil disruption. It wasn't productive, so it was kind of closed. Now, because of our own paralysis, political paralysis at home, meaning we don't have any access to diplomats or anything like this, our guarantee for Croatia had lapsed. So we were not in any kind of position to do anything. And even if it hadn't lapsed, it's kind of good that it's lapsed, because even if it hadn't, we would have taken a prestige hit, because we would have been compelled to sit on our hands and watch. But that's a sure sign of things to come. I suspect the Austrians have also got involved. They occupied Switzerland some time ago. They've just maintained a military occupation with Switzerland, and they're at war with France. It's like it never ends. That's given me some food for thought. Over the summer, as the turns are now getting longer as we get into late game, there's more time for kind of reflection, contemplation between turns. And, we could kind of do what we have been doing with Austria, which is to say that when Austria goes to war with us, we defeat them militarily, we occupy their kind of political heartland, and the hope is we can continue to do that. I think we have the forces still at our disposal to do that. But what that means is, okay, we maybe secure another territory or two. We have to wait for Austria to offer us territory, so maybe we secure the Dalmatian coastline, next turn of the circle, maybe with something in, I don't know, Transylvania. But that policy only has so much mileage, which is to say that at some point, it will take us, decades of just endless repeat conflicts for us to make any real dent. These southern areas of the Austrian Empire are not really the urbanized, the most productive areas of the Austrian Empire. They're not the areas of the Austrian Empire that's going to yield a lot of tax returns. So it doesn't really have the impact that we want. It doesn't really cripple the Austrians. We can militarily defeat them. We have laid waste to their industrial economy. So Austria is, we've kind of, we've swapped roles. Austria is the sick man of Europe. But I don't think long term all it's gonna do is acquire for us territory that is going to be rebellious, relatively unproductive, fairly kind of agrarian in character. Our economy's at a point now where we're not going to be building any more cereal farms. Our own cereal farms are very productive. They've been upgraded. We have mechanization of agriculture that's simply acquiring territory. There are some exceptions here. Kronstadt, for example, access to timber would be good, but I'm not sure if it's worth it. My thinking is we're going to take a new policy with Austria. The next time Austria goes to war with us, and this is not a concrete plan, it's an idea that I'm toying with, we make it a sort of a forever war, which is to say that we defeat Austria in the field, we vanquish their army, we militarily occupy Transylvania, Hungary, and Vienna. We essentially occupy the southern part of the empire, and we turn Hungary. We could maybe use the Carpathians as a bit of a natural boundary. We could take the bordering regions, but the idea is to reduce the Austrian Empire to really being a kind of German state. controlling Austria itself and maybe Bohemia. This means that the means that they have to replenish their army is diminished. They're just a much more diminished state. But we maintain a permanent kind of war state. We militarily occupy Vienna, and this entire area becomes a kind of military frontier. Now, in the short term, that's obviously not good. It's going to tie up a lot of forces. We would have to periodically conduct sorties north of the Danube to defeat Austrian forces, vanquish them, then fall back. But my thinking is, over a period of time, this should erode Austria's capacity to replace its losses, and we eventually just begin destroying army corps entirely. That's the idea, that we whittle them down into something that is so weak, so sort of frail, that it begins to, we can begin to kind of remove forces from what would be the military frontier. So we would refer to Transylvania, Hungary, Croatia, and the centre of Austria itself as a military frontier. It would be a militarized frontier. We'll be in a permanent state of conflict. Now, as it is, we are locked into a permanent conflict anyway, and that is with Greece and Romania, basically, the Principality of Romania. And that reflects concretely on our national morale. We lose national morale from war weariness, and I suppose that's because we're locked into a kind of an insurgency. There's no kind of resolution to this conflict. And it's kind of, it has a, a bit like a lot of insurgencies, it has a long-term impact and kind of public support and this kind of thing. Now, the idea of the military frontier policy is that with control of Vienna, that it gives us an instant short-term resolution to national morale, and it also provides us with a mechanism, a lever, with which to restore national morale through sorties into the north to control cities, then we can take Prague. And if we lose Prague, we don't lose loads of national morale. But the Austrians do, because Prague is not an Ottoman city, it's an Austrian city. If we lose Vienna and retake it, we get lots of national morale, the Austrians lose lots, but we don't lose anything for losing Vienna. So the idea is, it's a kind of mechanism, it's like an Orwellian forever war that we can tap to ensure that our domestic situation is kept in check. And if we can whittle the Austrians down into a kind of, a kind of German principality, which is what they started out as anyway. They just remove them as a threat. Yeah, okay, we control a huge amount of territory that we have to then construct small forces, brigade and division sized forces that will comprise a force of occupation. But our kind of teeth arms, our armies that are structured into army corps, this kind of thing, eventually we could begin to move those out. We could probably maintain one or maybe even two devoted as a kind of strike force within the military occupation zone, the sort of militarized frontier. We can respond to Russian interventions or German interventions or whatever else, But with Germany not seeming to form and being permanently kind of Prussia or like the North German Confederation, they're less. I think they're a less significant threat. It's whether or not we can get away with this, but at the same time, if we continuously have wars with Austria, at some point it's going to bite us in the arse. At some point, Austria is going to declare war on us whilst we're at war with Russia or someone else, and then we would not have the means to defeat them. Then we would be in a really, really difficult situation. We'll be looking at losing territory, and maybe even losing swathes of Europe. I don't know, of our position in the Balkan Peninsula. So it's an idea, it's not concrete, but it's an idea that I'm toying with, and it might be the case that that's what we look to do. And whether it comes off or not rests on a couple of assumptions. One, that if we reduce Austria to kind of this area, really, that this is enough to kind of whittle them down. I mean, presumably their manpower will eventually be depleted, their state revenue will not be significant. I mean, okay, Prague and parts of Austria are quite wealthy and urbanized, but I think that we reduce them to something similar to like Bavaria, almost like I don't think that they'd be a great power, and they wouldn't be able to maintain a large force, and they wouldn't be able to sustain losses, and they would probably continuously offer us peace deals, and we can just ignore them until such a time as we want to take that peace deal. So if we end up getting in a sticky situation with a third party gets involved, then we can just accept the peace deal. Okay, we give back huge amounts of Austrian territory, but the idea is the longer we maintain the military frontier, the weaker Austria becomes. It'd be much harder. It'd take a long time for Austria to replace its losses, to reconstruct its forces. So it's an idea I'm toying with. The other thing is, this is a bit different. It's not to do with foreign relations. It's to do with the economy. We're at a point now where we're kind of reaching a ceiling in terms of what we can construct. Now, there are still plenty of industrial, agricultural sites that we could theoretically construct, but constructing things doesn't result in an increased consumption of that commodity. You kind of reach a ceiling. You get to a point where, if we get the assets balance, probably not actually, the trade balance. I mean, I typically, with agricultural goods, like, when you have a very small economy, if you increase the amount of availability on the domestic market, it increases the amount of consumption, presumably because they could become slightly cheaper. But you get a ceiling pretty quickly. It's why I tend to have about 30, with luxury goods about 20, available on the domestic market. And I pretty much offer everything else. I dump everything else on the world market. So it's open to sale. Now, of course, we don't sell everything that's available. Some things we do. We probably will sell 40 units of opium, for example. Some things we will sell 21 units of luxury goods, and we certainly will sell 11 units of textiles. But there's a limit, really. The availability results in increased consumption, and we're well beyond that limit. And there's also a limit as to how much you can export. The global market is only so big, so we kind of almost in a kind of classic crisis of overproduction. It's the beginning of an economic crisis, and the catalyst for the economic crisis in terms of game mechanics is an across-the-board accumulation of private capital. This reflects the accumulation and concentration of private capital and not reinvesting in plant or anything like that, because there's no point. Because increasingly, you have kind of monopoly. We're like a monopoly stage capitalism. So the only answers to that in classical capitalism is to expand your market through force of arms. We are not in a position to do that because of the kind of paralysis, the crisis the Ottoman Empire is experiencing politically, means that we're kind of closed off to any kind of plays. The other thing, however, that we can do, and this is our first experimental site, and that is to build RGOs in other countries. Now, we can't build RGOs in any country. I think it's subject to a number of things. One, it's subject to whether or not we have a commerce agreement with a power. So we can build RGOs, for example, in France and in Great Britain, because we have commerce agreements with them. But they're very expensive, like especially in Britain. They're prohibitively expensive, and these are already quite developed powers, and it doesn't really strategically benefit us to pour private capital into, the economies of kind of like Western powers at all. So my thinking is, we begin to look at places like China and Japan, where, for one, we can develop resources that we need access to in the international market that we can't really develop anymore. We can't develop any more coal sites. In terms of things like coal, certain kinds of strategic raw materials, we're now at the mercy of the Academy of Sciences. We're at the mercy of new technologies becoming available that allows us to increase our productivity and efficiency. And there's nothing really in the pipeline that I can see in the next 5 years that's going to have a qualitative impact there, with probably one exception, that is chemical plants. We're a net importer of chemicals, despite the fact that we have a number of chemical plants in the Ottoman Empire, and they all have railroad access, and they're all in highly urbanized areas. So it's the next stage really is that we have to increase the efficiency of those chemical plants. That requires a qualitative kind of technological leap. But with things like coal, for example, China we don't have a commerce agreement with. I suspect that we're allowed to build in China because it's unorganized. It's disorganized to the point that we can develop their resources. This is like foreign direct investment, really. There's a twin benefit to places like China and also Japan. One of them is that we're kind of cultivating the economies of powers that it benefits us in terms of geopolitics to develop. We want a powerful China and a powerful Japan. They sit on the eastern seaboard of Russia, the Russian Empire, which is, of course, a transcontinental power. A powerful China and Japan would not be desirable to Britain or France, so it benefits us strategically to develop these regions. The other benefit, of course, is that these are quite backward powers still. Japan is now developing quite quickly, but it allows us to develop their economy, so these powers become more powerful, they get more tax revenue, but it also gives us access to raw materials, to certain things like tea. Coal is the main thing I'm looking at. So we're developing, our first experimental RGO is a rice paddy on the island of Formosa, or Taiwan today, or Taipei. I don't know how long we get to control this RGO for. I don't know whether it remains in our control in perpetuity or whether or not it's a temporary thing. I know that, for example, if in a war you gain control over an RGO and then a peace deal is signed, you still control that RGO even though the territory goes back into the control of another power, maybe an allied power or something like this. But eventually, control of that RGO slips back into the control of the host power, which may be the case here. That's okay, it doesn't really matter. The rice paddy is extremely cheap, it will offer a bit of a return on the investment, and it allows us to import rice more cheaply from China if we develop their agricultural sites. Agricultural sites are very cheap. This allows us to unload our private capital so that we don't have a big concentration of capital that can serve as a catalyst for a crisis of overproduction, for an economic crisis. Now, the key thing, of course, we're looking at is things like coal. Coal is the sort of is the resource of the age, of course, and we have already exploited all of our coal sites. But there are plenty of coal sites in backward regions of the world that are just undeveloped. We can build coal sites here. We can upgrade those coal sites. We can't provide them with road access. There's limits to what we can build. We can't improve the infrastructure. But developing coal in China would make China eventually a net coal exporter because it doesn't have any kind of industrial base. This could really benefit us. It could benefit us. In terms of what we can actually build, I haven't really looked. We can build agricultural sites. We can build raw material sites. I'm not sure if we can build factories. We can't build factories, okay? So there's certain things that we can build. We can't build infrastructure, but we can develop their kind of their raw material base, and we can then import those goods. Even if, like, so for example, if we've got a coal mine or a lot of coal mines in Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula, even if those coal mines go back over to Chinese control, that's fine. For a period of time, they might offer a return on the investment. But then we can import coal, and that's becoming a bit of a problem. Increasingly, coal, there's no shortage on the global market, but you can see we're almost at a crunch point. And if other countries begin to suddenly dramatically expand their industrial base without upgrading their own coal sites, that might happen. We could start looking at a bit of a coal shortage. So it's experimental. We're going to see what happens with this rice paddy in Formosa over the next year or two, once it's complete. And that will provide us with a kind of a way that we can measure how our investments are going to look. It may be the case that we retain long-term control over these sites. It may be that it gives China a casus belli against us, like an intrusive casus belli, which means that they could regain control over them. Obviously that wouldn't really be desirable. The other thing is tea, rice, things that we don't have good access to. Timber is the other thing. So if we look at timber sites abroad, there's a few dotted around, and yeah, we can continuously just invest. Now, China and Japan are going to be areas of interest. I think Latin America is trickier. I think Latin America, because these states are more organized, but Latin America could be interesting, depending on what we can do, what plays we can make. Let's go for something like cattle, where there's going to be a lot of access to kind of cattle. I think we have, there we go, cattle farm. So just from looking at that, we can't really do anything in Latin America. I think these states are just too centralized, too organized. The state is too involved in the economy to allow sort of foreign direct investment on our part. But where we can, we're going to try and unload capital into areas that provide us with a net strategic benefit, but also an economic benefit. It allows us to get access to certain kinds of raw materials. We go to the assets balance and look at coal, for example. We're importing 70 units of coal, most of it from northern Germany. Availability in northern Germany is 59. Demand is 148. Parana is an annoying site because Parana is a landlocked site in basically Bolivia. I'm not sure if it's the case that is opened up based on some kind of like Joseph Conrad-esque, Heart of Darkness, some river is opened up into Bolivia through the kind of, I don't know, maybe through the kind of the interior, the exploration of the interior of Brazil, or something like this. This is what I suspect might be the case, that maybe the Amazon opens up this trade site. This is Parana. I think it's called Parana. I know it's Southern Andes, I'm lying. I think it's over here. Yeah, so like just from crafts production and from the fact that these are just basket case economies, this is a landlocked area. So you've got a lot of raw materials. The daft thing is, if you put any kind of heavy demand on these, very, very quickly this will be depleted because, of course, there are not huge amounts of goods being produced here. They're just being stockpiled. It's an area that is not plugged in to the world economy. But I think that probably the opening up of Brazil's interior might change that. I may be wrong, however. But yeah, so if we look at the assets balance, yeah, coal sites, it is getting trickier. You've got the North Andes, 85 units, but again, these areas are a little bit deceptive. They're a little bit deceptive because they don't produce a lot. The reality is they just stockpile from crafts production, and as the world economy is getting hungrier, these areas will very quickly deplete. Areas like Germany, however, there's a lot of coal sites in Germany. These, there's probably always going to be 59 units of coal available in North Germany, the Low Countries and places like that. But yeah, if we can develop North China, which at the moment sits right at the bottom, 8 units sold, none requested, then that gives us kind of guaranteed access to coal. So that's my thinking. We'll see if it kind of comes to pass anyway. Beyond that, there's not much else to report, in truth. There's been no other massive developments that I can think of. We've had a number of kind of officers retire. They were mostly 2 stars lieutenant generals. One of them was a naval officer. We've just had a new naval officer spawn. He looks fairly generic. He's got a fairly generic portrait. Yuritsi Hussein Pasha, I think, is his name. I can't really read it from here. But, yeah, the 2 army officers, the 2 army 2 stars that were retired. I can't really see where the report is now. Here we go. So you've got Haki Vasim Pasha is retired. Mehmet Zed Pasha and Safed Pasha have retired. Now, Haki Vasim, I think, was the naval officer. So there's 2 stars. That's not good, obviously. But it's not any of our kind of key 3-star generals at this point. But some of them are getting on. We've still got Abdul Karim Nadir in play. I mean, he was a 2-star, 12 years ago. So he's going to be pushing. Well, he's got to be getting on, sort of thing. We've got Abdi Pasha. He was also a 2-star 20 years ago. I think him and Abdul Karim, I think, are the last of them. Of the class of 1850, sort of thing. Who have we got? Sarajevo, the Second Army. Okay, we've still got Hussein Avni. Now, he definitely dies at the end of this decade because he's involved in the coup d'etat against the Sultan. Yeah, Abdul Karim Nadir. So we've still got 3 officers, and they are 3. They're now all 3 stars. I mean, they're likely going to be getting on. These guys have got to be in their 70s, I'd imagine. So yeah, there's a good chance we'll lose those in the next decade. That's pretty much it. No other significant developments. We're continuing the naval expansion, I should point out. We've kind of set up a continuous site, the Selim Yavuz construction site, where we're going to continuously have 1 or 2 or 3 kind of squadrons in construction. We've currently got 2 squadrons of ironclad corvettes, 1 squadron of ironclad frigates in construction at the Selim Yavuz site. And we have our first ironclads have joined the fleet, and that is 2 squadrons of ironclad corvettes. Again, pleasingly, they have original names from the period. So the fleet is gradually being replaced. And as we kind of, as these entered service into the main fleet, this is the fleet reserve, we decommissioned 2 squadrons of traditional Age of Sail. So we're not really expanding the fleet at the moment. We're kind of qualitatively changing the fleet. By constructing ships and replacing them. We might even eventually get rid of these small ironclad gunboats. We'll see. I mean, these were our first ironclad ships, but they don't serve much purpose. That said, they might be worth keeping because they can conduct patrols in the Bosporus, to be fair. They're only really effective. They are very much brown water ships kind of thing. So the naval construction program continues. The army expansion plan continues, although we don't really have any other 3 stars. Actually, that's a lie. We have 1 additional 3-star, I believe. I think we just saw him a moment ago. No, it wasn't there. Where was it? I don't think we do. I mean, it would be... If we construct an army... No, we do, yeah. We have Osman Nuri Pasha. It's a 3-star. But again, it's likely that Abdul Karim Nadir, he's senior, is likely to retire in a reasonably sort of... probably within the next 5 to 10 years, at a guess. We'll see what other officers, hopefully, other officers spawn over the coming years, and then really it will require action because we'll end up like we did in 1850 with a load of 2-star generals and 1 3-star and like loads of armies that can't be commanded or have massive combat penalties. But yeah, that can quickly be rectified on the basis of giving our commanders experience in the field. Other than that, our colonial affairs are, as you might imagine, in a kind of stasis. There's nothing we can really do other than to try and consolidate our position on those areas we already hold. The Hejaz is a protectorate, Eritrea is a protectorate, Somaliland is a protectorate, the Yemen, the Persian Gulf states, these are all fully fledged colonies, as is Libya. So that's the state of play with the colonial affairs, and it's likely going to remain the state of play with regard to colonial affairs for the foreseeable future. The other area I should have mentioned, just going back to kind of our economic plan for foreign direct investment, the other candidate, of course, is Persia. Persia is not any kind of threat to us now. You know, I mean, we don't really have the option to militarily expand into Persia, but keeping in mind that military expansion into areas, as we discovered with Egypt, as we discovered with Greece, and sort of Wallachia, you know, or Romania, it's not always cracked up to be. It's not the sort of, you know, it's not like always a kind of an economic panacea, opening up new markets. You end up acquiring territories that are hard to keep down. You can end up being locked into kind of permanent conflicts, as we are in Greece and Romania. So military intervention into Persia anyway would have fairly limited utility. We'd be acquiring areas that are not really productive. Okay, we'd expand our domestic market a little bit, which just results in greater private capital returns with no opportunities for investment for that capital, really. So we could look at maybe putting a coal site into Tabriz, upgrading that coal site. Silk production in Persia could also be interesting, and there's also sites for dyes. We have very, very robust domestic production for dyes. But dyes is a commodity that, you know, it's not like we're stockpiling it. It's not like cotton, where the market is just saturated. There is always an export market for dyes. As far as I can see, he says, with 700... Okay, that's obviously bullshit. I'm sitting on 700 units of dyes. I thought I was exporting a lot more. Let's have a look at that. It might be that... the exports for dyes has dried up, and that's kind of slipped under the radar. I mean, I do tend to read all these reports, but there are some things that slip under the radar. Fruits. Yeah, so we're only really since 25, 34 units of dyes, 34, 44 units of dyes plus 25, and we are exporting loads of dyes. That's 50, 60 units of dyes. We're exporting 60 units of dyes. Well, in the last turn anyway. Let's have a look at how many units we produce. Structure expenses. So we're exporting 60 plus 21. So that's 81. And our production. Craftsman production is 5. Okay, so yeah, so 61. Sites production is 68. Plus 68 plus 5, 73. National market sales are 10. I think I've just destroyed my brain. Basically, I think we're exporting slightly less than we're producing. So yeah, there is a gradual accumulation. That might change though. I mean, it is a consistent export. Let me just get back to that. This is really bothering me now. We don't have so many that we're losing any through corruption or anything. Craft production is 5, national market sales are 10. So if we had no RGOs and we weren't exporting any, we would be running our loss. Chemical labs produce dyes, of course. We've got dyes quarry being developed in Salum. Yeah, I mean, we've got enough that there's no urgency with regard to dyes. But I don't think we're experiencing a massive crisis of overproduction with dyes. I just think that there's a bit of plasticity in the market, and you can go for a period where you're not exporting quite as much as you're producing, but we still export a lot of dyes. But yeah, I mean, anyway, dye quarries in Persia, obviously, from looking at that, would not be a priority. But, you know, coal sites, some areas that are of interest, opium, you know, for example, sulfates, cotton, probably not just now. A lot of opium down here. Persian opium in Shiraz. Yeah, there we go. I'm tempted to put an opium plantation in Shiraz straight away. This, actually, no, wouldn't, because they might have a different setup to China. It's expensive. We've got a lot of capital anyway. See, that cost us so much. It cost us a lot more than the flat rate. It cost us thousands. We're going to construct anyway an opium plantation. In Persia, they might have a slightly different domestic setup. I'm talking about the domestic setup, I'm talking about this kind of government, like their trade rules might be different, their economy rules might be slightly different. That might determine what happens with our RGO. So Persia cast the net a little bit wider. We don't lose anything that much. I mean, it means that, opium is definitely one of those things you're always going to export more than you're producing. It's not like dyes. We're going to end up with 700 units of opium. So that's worth doing, I think. Yeah. So we've got an experimental site in Persia, an experimental site in Formosa off of China. We'll see what happens to those. That will provide us with a kind of a yardstick with which to measure how foreign direct investment in those regions might end up kind of panning out. Got to leave it there. It's a late summer report. So the next report might be kind of in the winter, maybe late 72, early 73. So yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.